Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining our panel today, Black Women in Education. We're kicking off with early childhood and K-12. So I just want to thank everyone who is joining us this morning, Saturday morning, spending your time to really engage with us in an actionable discussion. Before we actually kick in and get started, we would like to take a moment of silence, just 60 seconds, to honor our fallen heroes, our civil rights heroes that have left us within the last couple of days. So let's do our moment of silence in reflection for their hard work. Okay, we'll come back. Um, So again, I just want to say, so glad you all can make it. When you come into the YouTube, feel free to chat, ask questions. Our panelists and myself will be moderating, and we'll be able to try to get to some of the questions that you guys ask. I do want to give a shout out to, actually, I'm going to give a shout out to all of my sisters. I think those of you guys who know me know that I'm the oldest of four girls. And I'm going to shout them all out because they have all helped me put this event together and have been so supportive. So I shout out my sister Sharita, who actually created my website, my sister Naima, who runs my social media and also has created this awesome logo, and then my sister Tamika, who is actually sponsoring the event. You guys will be getting a follow-up email with a discount from her items. She's a spiritual advisor, and don't we all need spiritual advising during this time? So I just want to thank out my lovely sisters. And then I want to thank the sisterhood for coming on and really showing and sharing their expertise. I really absolutely appreciate the time and effort that we have done to come together and to do this work. Um, I want to talk just a little bit about why I'm here and why we're doing this work. My motto is peace. Positive education always causes elevation. And so I live to strive to ensure that we have spaces where we can share knowledge and we can learn from that knowledge and then we can take action steps. I truly believe that education is the civil rights movement of our time, right? Without education, without knowledge, how are you going to be able to advance in the world? And I don't just mean, we are talking specifically about K-12 and early childhood today, but education, I think, has to have a broader base of definition in this country. So I think that's one of the amazing things that we can start talking about together. Education is radical. It is the driver of change, not just about what we know as public education or education in the US. Education is that which leads us to the quality of life that we want, the success metrics we determine for ourselves. And this is important. It is not, and it should not be centered on white ideology, not on corporate speak, or what Merriam and Webster says is correct. It's about what we want and what we value. We have created an open forum and an open space because we don't want to just preach to the choir. You are hearing expertise and getting experience for free. These women on this panel are phenomenal. They have amazing education, knowledge to share with you, and we're doing this because we think it's important. This is a get real and an actionable moment. We are some bad sisters. There is amazing Black talent in all spheres of influence and circle. If you don't know them, if you don't know the amazing Black talent around you, you're not living your life to the fullest. We are committed to the work, right? We are putting our resources, our minds, our emotions, our voices out there. And this is not easy. There's an emotional tax here, but one we want to pay because this space is about actionable community and essential important to our ideologies. There's an inherent risk to being considered the angry Black woman. There's an inherent risk to us trying to create safe spaces. As you all know, if you tried to be on the first time we did this work, right? People are trying to silence us. People are trying to stop us. This work is not easy. But with fear comes courage. This is a moment of fearlessness and heroism. And with that, my sisters, I thank you. I'm reminded of a time when I walked into a school and children were treated as robots. Everything was clean and shiny, but there were lines on the floor and strict uniformity and assimilation. Our children's souls were dying. Their Blackness was being stamped out, all in the name of testing metrics and the falsehoods of the American dream. That was the time when it was more than clear that white hope, heroism, altruism was a pervasive ill within our culture. That assimilation and integration has done more harm than good, and that setting our students up for compliance with severe punishments for minor infractions mirrored the justice system here in the United States. So how do we get to be here in this space today? Well, as most of you all know who are on this panel especially, and maybe you all out there, I love creating spaces and time for Black women to get together, kiki. We have our little happy hours, we get together, we get to know each other. I do it. I started off when I was living in Nashville, Tennessee, but I've done it all across the country. And then when the pandemic hit, people were like, can you do this virtually? So we were just doing it on a fun way, fun tip. But then we decided, doesn't it make sense to actually elevate our experiences and then make some action steps? So this is kind of how this was born. It was also born of the idea that last year I produced a play called Sisters on Fire. And as part of Sisters on Fire, we would have audience talkbacks, and the learning was so rich, the conversation so engaging with so many different people from so many different walks of life, who were really understanding the Black woman experience in the United States for the first time, that we created in-person community events that were sold out. And so we decided to merge these two ideas and create these virtually. And so here we are. This first 90, 75 minutes, I don't know, I'm like terrible with time, but the first 90 minutes that we have here is going to be focused on early childhood and K-12 education. And then if you stick around, come back on at 1 p.m., we'll be talking about higher ed. So we're thinking all through the gamut, right? The life of an entire human being, from essentially birth all the way until they're thinking about their career path. Okay, so I'm going to flag. I'm usually like so awesome at like all of the virtual stuff, but this is my first time doing YouTube Live and StreamYard. So if you all just give me some grace as I move around and maneuver and like figure out and make sure that things are going well, I really, really would appreciate that. So I'm going to go ahead and share some slides for myself and the panelists. And please, please, everyone, feel free to, like I said, say hi when you're in the YouTube, and then feel free to ask our panelists questions as we're going through things. Okay, so there are just some things that I wanted to highlight. Historically, our educational system here in the United States has a history of erasing and devaluing Black lives, experiences, and people. And if you think about that, most school reading reinforces ideas of white supremacy and again, devalues Black lives, experiences, in our history. To see that, you can see that the diversity in children's books is really lacking, right? 50% of our children's books are about white folk. And then the next category is animals, right? So as Black people and as people of color, we haven't even surpassed the idea of having more literature that really talks about us. We can't even surpass what we have going on when it comes to animals, which I find really striking. The other thing that I think we should know and understand is that there is a clear delineation between the school to prison pipeline. If you think about the amount of students who are receiving out of school suspensions, and that's the time that students are being taken away from the ability to actually engage in their education. So they're being suspended outside of school, cannot come into the school building. And you can see the disproportionate effect of that has on Black boys and Black girls. So if you think about this, Black students account for 15% of the student body, and yet they were 31% of arrests. This is insane, and I think that's insane for lots of reasons. One, I do not believe in police in school buildings, point blank, end of story. Students should not be arrested for infractions in the school. That is a clear, again, delineation between the school to prison pipeline. Okay, so that's like the framing that I wanted to go through. I'm now going to kick it off to our panelists to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about some of the things they want to highlight. So Mia?
Good morning, everyone. First, I want to just thank Kwamara for bringing us all together today. As she mentioned, this is something we do often. We get together as women and share and celebrate the great work that we're doing all around the country. And we're also a support to one another as we navigate the real challenges of advancing education equity in each of our contexts. So a little bit more about me. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, was educated in public schools all throughout my K-12 experience. And after college and law school, decided to move to Nashville to start a public charter school there, Intrepid College Prep, which I led for a series of years. And notably, our founding class, which is about to be 12th graders, at that critical gateway in their education, Algebra 1, 98% of our Black and Brown students achieved proficiency. And so that gave me just so much joy, and also reaffirmed that there are ways to educate our children that honor the rigor that they deserve, but also honoring their unique identities and preparing them for a wonderful future. I'm actually currently now in St. Louis as a partner at the Opportunity Trust, which is a nonprofit intermediary investing in schools, teachers, and leaders and families across the St. Louis region to advance a vision for education equity. And so I come today with that lens of now having sort of a system level view of what can be done to support Black leaders, Black students, Black teachers, Black families. So we often begin conversations about our work in education asking, how are the children? And of course, we must continue to center the experiences of our children as we design a better future. But for the purposes of this conversation, I'm asking, how are the Black women? Let's roll back 70 years. In the white dominant narrative of civil rights, we often accept that Brown versus Board of Education, decided in 1954, ushered in a grand era of wonderful integration and equality. We just whitewashed that entire history. But we don't talk about the fact that Black educators lost jobs. We don't talk about the fact that Black schools that centered Black lives, Black histories, and Black joy closed. And that's the danger of a single story. And so I think about that in this current moment where we have Black people, Black women, demanding to be heard, demanding reallocation of resources, demanding more equitable learning experiences for our kids, and demanding a more equitable future. But even still in this moment, Black women who are vocal about our pain, our needs, and our experiences are often shamed and threatened with loss of financial support, loss of career opportunities, and ultimately a loss of our lives and livelihoods. And so you don't have to take it from me. This is happening all around the country. Kumar, if you can advance the slide to the next. Thank you. And here's just one example. Carmita Saman, if you don't know her, she's a phenomenal leader leading the Surge Institute, which is a leadership incubator around the country. And she talked about in the weeks that have passed since Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and these recent spate of killings of Black lives, you know, in her community where she's been vocal about what this means for Black education, what it means for philanthropy of Black and Brown leaders. You know, she's been told that speaking directly to the threat that is pervasive to Black lives, that she's being too bold or, too divisive. Mm-hmm. And that's happening in all of the conversations around how organizations have navigated the last 2 months as we've, demanded, again, more support, more advocacy around reallocation of resources, and ultimately redesigning systems that were always designed for Black and brown bodies to fail and to die. You can advance to the next. And so my call to action is that the people closest to the pain need to be closest to the power. And so I invite all of you to look closely at the systems that you're a part of, that you're leading, that you're supporting, and ask, are the people closest to the pain leading and guiding in very real ways your institutions? So that means first looking at equitable philanthropy. So I love the space I'm in now because I really get to use my power in the funder community to amplify the phenomenal work that Black and Indigenous people of color, and Black people in particular, are doing to create equitable learning communities for our kids. When I'm at the table, it's important that I help dismantle dynamics where Black and Indigenous people of color have to jump through more hurdles to access resources or are just excluded from those conversations altogether, in favor of centering white savior narratives in education, where people that have accomplished just as much as us, or sometimes even less, just get accelerated and vaulted into positions of influence and power with all of the resources at the table to do so. The second is incubating new solutions. So I'm also investing in school models that are reimagining what school can be for children. These are schools that honor the brilliant minds of Black and brown children. They honor their unique and rich identities and support them in achieving holistic outcomes that allow them to thrive in the world as change makers. As a critical addition to that, it's also really important that schools look closely at their history curriculum in particular. And we should talk about the choices we're able to make in schools that have the freedom to make their own curriculum, like charter schools, in looking at centering Black histories, the plural, because there is, again, danger in a single story. And often we focus on, slavery, Civil War, Reconstruction, the Civil Rights Movement, and then the Obama era, and we lose so much in between of the ways in which we've always been innovating and living in our joy. And there's just so much more to our story and history. And so I just invite leaders on the call to put pressure on their curriculum leads and their curriculum specialists and your chief academic officers and your principals to really look closely at the history curriculum in particular. And it should really be called a histories curriculum if we're really going to honor the experiences of Black and Indigenous people of color in that work. And then the last is supporting diverse leaders. So it's important to change the face of leadership. As I work with boards of directors, school leaders, nonprofit leaders that touch up the education sector, I'm looking closely at the composition of your team. So there's no reason in 2020 for the majority of these institutions that purport to be high performing and about advancing equity for people of color to be majority white. So at a minimum, we're looking for teams to be 50% Black and Indigenous people of color on the leadership team. And we're also building the talent pipelines to support that reality long term. And so those are the three calls to action. In your spaces, ask the questions about funding and equity, be bold and get on the ground about innovating with new solutions, and support diverse leaders, which means putting pressure on your leadership to change the face of leadership. And so I'm excited again to be in the conversation today. Thank you again, Kumar, for having us, and excited to pass the baton to the next panelist.
Yeah, and before we get there, I just want to say I love what you're highlighting around making sure that we have diverse leaders that sit on our boards, on our board of directors, right? That we have that pipeline. So thank you so much for really elevating that. And then I think the other part of that conversation is how do we actually hold our funders accountable? So are we looking at our funders and saying, do they have the diverse staff and diverse people in leadership positions, even on the funding side of things? So I love that you said that. Thank you so much, Mia. Our next person is Katrina.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Katrina, of course, Dr. Fraser, some call me. And my background, I have an interesting story. I've been a principal for about 4 years. I started a consulting company. I taught as a public school and charter school teacher for 14 years. I have 2 girls. I was a teenage mother, got married at 20. So where I am now, I started a consulting company called Win-Win Educational Consulting to just help as many African-American leaders as I possibly can to help with executive coaching. And so what I've discovered in my journey, many of us as Black women, we've grown up in a lot of environments that hadn't necessarily had a 2-parent home, or, we have this middle class mentality. I grew up extremely poor. And so what I noticed is when I transitioned out of being poor and actually having means, is that there's a whole different world that no one ever explained to me. And so being an educator, what I noticed is that access to all types of things is a little bit different when you have the money and you can live in certain areas and you have a 2-parent home. And so when I think about why Black leadership matters in education, I take a look at what the data says. And so one of the things I noticed before I came into being a leader as a teacher, I noticed that 52%, so the National Center for Education Statistics said that 52% of public school students are minorities. And of course, we have 15% Black and Hispanic, 27%, and then 2 or more races, 6%. So we have this huge number of kids that are sitting in our public schools who are minorities. And then 78% of the public school principals are white. So with that, you also have only 10% of your principals in the schools are Black. And then you have 80% of public school teachers are white. And then when you move and start thinking about, okay, so what does that look like and what is the implications of that? I read a study a couple of weeks ago that said that 39% of white educators, as teachers and leaders, think that don't believe that their programs prepared them to help low-income Black and Latino students compared to 24% of non-white educators. Go to the next slide. So why does this matter? It matters because when you're sitting in a classroom, or if you were me and you are a kid that's coming from a poor environment, you're sitting there, a lot of the language that's being spoken, you don't know what they're talking about. You hear it and they're teaching it and they have the textbooks and they have all of these things, but the culture gaps leads to an academic gap, which tells you why our kids are failing. When you go from that, you think about the implicit biases, where the kids are being suspended, like Kumar said earlier, they're being suspended for little bitty minor offenses. It's things that, with being in turnaround work and being in low performing schools, which is my target, what I do, what I notice is just, the kid can get up and go to the trash can and it's an issue, instead of really dealing with what's actually going on, what have you put in place and what are the procedures that are there. And then you also have subjective and unfair treatment of minority students, which leads to an overall school culture problem. So then you have people from the outside coming in, policymakers, leaders in the district that come in and are like, oh, this school is horrible. But what we haven't realized is that you have so many kids who are being treated unfairly. They are. And I wish I wrote an article on LinkedIn a little while back about if we could be a fly on the wall. If parents and community leaders, if people who really think they know what's happening in schools could be a fly on the wall, they'd be surprised at what you see. And so with this, when you have majority of your leaders are white, the majority of the students are minorities, you're going to have, teachers and leaders don't want to stay in education because they don't see themselves as improving. And as I talk to so many different leaders, what I find out, and as I coach them through, they're afraid of even getting in the leadership positions. So quick story, my first principal position, which was in a public school, traditional public school, every principal I sat around was just afraid to say the right thing. Like they were afraid to just stand up and say, y'all, this is crazy. But they would say it to me privately and whisper, and I'm like, what in the world? I never experienced anything because, from my understanding, if you've ever read anything about the Ruby Payne study, there are the way that we believe, like when you come from a poor environment, you move to a middle class environment, your values change somewhat. And so here I am living in these two different worlds of speak truth, say what you need to say, be realistic about what you see. And then I move into an environment where everybody's like, just hold on to your job. And I'm like, this is crazy. So in the middle of all of that, what I discovered is that my voice was important. And I didn't know that before. I assumed that every teacher was teaching every day and kids were learning. And so with all of these implications, what I discovered is that's why we have all these failing schools. And so my work is turnaround work. So I go into schools, and if they're failing, which is a lot of times when people call me, they're like, oh, my school is doing horrible. Can you come in and help or consult or do these different things? And the biggest thing you have to get past is helping the people see that the kids can actually do it. It's not, the actual instruction. It's not, we have books and we have all types of material. You can Google just about anything, even if you don't have a curriculum and you want to teach kids things and how to do specific things. Not that. It is first, you have to get everybody, even Black people, on the same page to say they can do it. That's the first thing. And when you get past that, what happens with kids is kids will amaze you. One of my, first experiences of doing actual turnaround work, and they got the data back, the leadership team was like, what? This can't be right. And I'm like, yeah, it's right. If you go in every single day and teach kids, you'll alleviate these failing schools. And so I, got my doctorate probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And one of the things I studied, I wanted to know if parent involvement had a huge effect on student achievement. And what I discovered in my study for poor minority kids, it didn't. Because they know that you can't necessarily do anything about their home life. You can't buy them clothes and make sure they have food to eat every day on the weekend, even though we have great programs like the backpack program, and we do all of that. But what matters most is what you do with that 8 hours. And so what I discovered is that whether it was a parent who came and volunteered every day, if it was a parent that only came to basketball games, if it was a parent that checked in on homework every single day, the largest decisive factor on whether they did well or not had more to do with what we did every single day. And so my interviewers, as they interviewed the kids, she actually said, my interview said that they sound like robots. Like they all can tell you exactly what the systems are, what they're expected to do, what they're expected to do with homework, how everything works, because it was very clear. And then she said, I, interviewed 80 kids, and all of these kids, like 87, all of these kids said the exact same thing. And so I think for us, as Black leaders, when I start shifting and going to these different environments, what I notice is unless you have somebody there that's consistent about what they want to see with kids, you're going to struggle. And we'll continue to have these failing schools. And then my final note, go to the last page. So why does all of this matter as it relates to education? Right now, we have 80% of our kids in the 4th grade from the results from 2019 who are not reading on grade level. 80%. And so that's huge. And I know we don't always, as parents and as people who are outside, we don't necessarily look at the data. I was sharing with someone the other day that we have to start educating ourselves about education. We assume if a school has a great program and the kids seem happy, and I've done turnaround work in the school of that nature. The kids were happy. It was, all exciting. Everybody was happy, and the kids weren't learning a darn thing. And we have to change that. You can, it's great for it to be shiny, but the goal is for the kids to learn how to read, write, and think. And so that's the big idea. Where do we go from here? And so depending on where you are, if you're a parent, if you're a school leader, if you're someone on the board, if you're someone who does hiring, the things that we need to focus on is make sure you vote in local elections for your school board. Read some data the other day that said only 2% of the population actually votes for their school board. And we wonder why our kids who are in these failing schools or are behind aren't getting the resources that they want, because you're not getting people in there who actually are close to the work, like Mia said before. You want people who are close to that trauma, who are close to the work, who understand what's actually happening. So vote. The second thing is And so that's the school board. Know your school's policy. If you're a parent, I've been called the parent whisperer. And I'm really not a parent whisperer. I just understand that our parents really want the best for their kids. They don't have means, and they may not have all the business, some of them, depending on what environments they come from, they don't have it all, and neither do you. But what we have to do is understand that our parents do want their kids to get a good education, and it's our responsibility to do that. So if you're a parent, know your policies. When kids are suspended, one of the shifts that I make when I go to schools is the first thing you need to do before you suspend a child is research it, investigate it, have some witnesses. Don't just go by, if that teacher said the child, threw some paper or threw a pen and it stabs, all of those things, investigate, have 2 witnesses. And so as a parent, sometimes you're accepting suspensions and accepting things from your kid, and you don't know policy. Looking at a handbook, it should tell you every single thing about how that school operates so that you can make sure that your child is being treated fairly. And if you are, the next thing, actionable step, if you are a leader or you someone that's desiring, so I work with a lot of new leaders. I mentor a lot of people who want to go into leadership. And one of the things that I have to say to them, the first and foremost, you have to see yourself as deserving to be at that table. You have to know you want to be at that table and you deserve to be at that table. So what do you need to do to get in the room? Because we can't make decisions sitting out and being on the sideline, even if they don't want you to be there. You push your way through that. And then the final thing, join other groups and organizations. If you're not a part of, I link to this little group called Phenomenal Women, and they send out little posts every single day, and it educates me on where we are as Black women. I love it. It gives me an opportunity to learn some things that I don't know. And so if you're not a part of a group, if you're in a sorority, of course, they have all types of things that's happening. If you join the NAACP, join groups where you can see people who are like-minded, who look like you, who have the same vision as you, so you don't feel like an outsider when you're in these spaces alone. So you know that you're going in there as a representation. And so I think that's all I have for actionable steps. But we as Black women have to begin to educate ourselves on the education that we're putting out there.
Great. Thank you so much, Katrina. Some of the things that I think that you highlighted that I just want to call out again is the importance of owning your own education, parents and students being a part of the conversation with educators, with school systems to drive what's going on in the school district, which I think is super important. The other thing that I think was, you mentioned it and why you talked about the achievement and opportunity gaps, but what you were really focusing on was the cultural gaps that really affect the opportunity and achievement gaps. And I think that's so key. Yeah. Very rarely has anyone ever spoken about the cultural gap. And again, this goes back to erasing the values and ways that Black people work within their communities. And so we are asking our students to not only learn content, but to also learn a different way of being simultaneously, and then penalizing them when they can't do it. So I just love the fact that you really elevated the importance of really what we need to be focusing on is this cultural gap, and valuating just as equally, just as importantly, the experiences of our Black students, as well as what's going on with white America, making sure that they're equally valued within the school system. So thank you so much, Katrina. I really appreciated that. Rashida.
Hi. First, I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank all of you for your messages in the chat. I say keep them going. I am one of those people. I'm used to speaking in person. I'm still getting used to virtual presentations, and I love the energy of in person. And so since I can't get your in-person energy, please send us lots of your energy through the chat. I'm reading the comments, and those things help us feel connected to all of you who we cannot see today. So my background is in corporate supply chain. So for the first 10 years of my career, I worked in corporate, focusing on strategy, operations, and business system design before transitioning to K-12 education in 2013. And I'm currently the founder of my company, Beyond 6, which is a consulting company in those areas of strategy, operations, and systems design. And so I am not an educator. And so what I would like to share with you today is from my perspective as a business person, and from that perspective of our education system as it relates to the design of it. So in general, anytime you think about design work, you begin with the purpose of the system, right? So why am I creating this system and what does this system need to do? And then from there, you will design the system to achieve exactly that purpose. And so within my first year of working in K-12 education system, a lot of people were saying, hey, the education system is broken. We need to reform it. But within my first year, I quickly came to see that our public education system is not broken. And it is doing exactly what it was designed to do. And so I know for some people that sounds like a radical statement, but I'll just ask you to stay with me here for a couple of moments. And I think by the time I conclude, you'll see where I'm going with this. And so if we look back over the history of education, first of all, the public education system was designed to teach morals, values, and basic education. Hear that, basic education. And it was not designed to achieve advanced educational outcomes for students in mass. Those outcomes were reserved for the elite, those who could afford private education. And so when we look at the initial education system that was created in the colonies back in the 1600s, it was originally designed to teach Puritan values and how to read the Bible. So let's just start there, okay? And it consisted of both public and Latin schools, but the Latin schools were where the social elite sent their sons to learn formally. All other students were, for the most part, educated at home using these, core values to be shared across. And so from the beginning, we see the difference in the quality of the public education system versus private education, right? One was to teach values and basic education, and the other was to provide that more advanced education. And so in general, early public schools in the United States did not focus on academics like math or science. Instead, they taught the virtues of family, religion, work ethic, and community. An example of this is the Cardinal Principles of Secondary Education. I know my educators in the room probably know this way more deeply than I do, but it was released in 1918, and a commission identified 7 main objectives of secondary school. So that's for our children ages 12 to 18. And these are the 7 objectives. I want y'all to listen closely. Health, command of fundamental processes, worthy home membership, vocation, citizenship, worthy use of leisure, and ethical character. Okay, so many of these objectives are about morals and values and work ethic, and not the advanced education that we seek for our students today. Now, over time, people have questioned the purpose of the education system. Is it to prepare people to work? Is it to prepare people for college? Should advanced education opportunities be limited to the most talented? Those questions still linger, but that leaves us living under the original purpose of the education system, which is to teach morals and values and provide basic knowledge. All right. So now, remember I said you start with your purpose, and then from that, you link that to the design of the system. So let's link those two. With our primary purpose being to teach morals and values, that's still the focus of our system today, right? Even if we can't agree on whether college is to prepare students for, even if we cannot agree if education is to prepare students for college or work, what remains unchallenged is the role of education to prepare us to be good citizens. So students begin their educational career learning how to behave in and out of the classroom. We have a lot of systems and structures in place to accomplish this, right? We have codes of conduct. We have all these behavior and disciplinary programs. We have roles in the school dedicated for this, the assistant principal or the dean of students, etc. And so while compliance is not always achieved, the public education system excels at delivering and building expectations around morals and values. And that is reflected in the school pipeline to prison that Kumara mentioned. Once students have been identified as troublemakers or non-conforming, that label tends to stick with them throughout their academic career and sometimes into adulthood, right? Because we've already determined that you are not a good citizen at this point in your career, and that stays with you sometimes. The second purpose of the public education system was to provide people with basic knowledge. And it's doing that. So I know Dr. Frazier shared some NAEP statistics around reading as it relates to African-American students and students of color. But if we just look at the NAEP scores in general for all students in 2019, in reading for fourth grade, only 34% were below NAEP basic. Remember, I said the goal of education is to prepare us for basic education. So then who isn't receiving that education? That's only 34% in fourth grade for reading and 27% in eighth grade for reading. And when we look at math, 19% of students are below basic and 31% are below basic. And I know some of you are probably still thinking like, Rashida, whatever, I'm not buying it. Education used to be good back in the day, like we've lost something. So I want to share a couple of quotes from a New York Times article about education. It was written by a prominent businessman, and he states, many of these young people are entering the great business houses of the city and are either failing completely, so they have to be discharged, or are unable to win the positions which should logically be theirs, because the public schools have not given them the necessary grounding and fundamentals. I am a product of the public schools myself, but as a friend of the school system, I cannot close my eyes to the fact that the schools are not giving our children the kind of education which is needed to equip them to enter the struggle of business, the kind of education which children who have their own way to make in the world have a right to expect, indeed to demand from the schools sustained by the community for their welfare. So Kumar, if you could do, there she is right there with that slide. And so this article was written in 1915. So let's be clear, there wasn't a time when the public education system was rigorously preparing our students for advanced outcomes. Therefore, the education system is not broken. It is doing exactly what it is designed to do. The challenge is our needs and our expectations of the system have changed. And for simplicity, I'm going to oversimplify this, right, for the sake of time, but I'll put those into two categories, one of which both Mia and Dr. Frazier spoke about, culturally responsive education, and then a high quality education for all. The morals and values stressed in the public system are based on white Christian, because remember, this started with Puritanism, white Christian norms, and do not include cultural norms of others or reflect how morals and values have evolved across generations. This norm gap contributes to our Black and Brown students being disciplined at disproportionate rates and disproportionately labeled as special education. And also now we see this in the mischaracterization of our millennials. You know, we all say they're lazy. They aren't lazy. They're different. And they have different things that they ascribe to. They have different values. We see this, and Dr. Frazier just hit on this. We see this in school dress code and behavior practices like tracking, where students are expected to engage the speaker with eye contacts. And students that don't do this are labeled as aloof, inattentive, and even identified for special education. But tracking is a white norm and does not account for Asian, Native American, and other cultures where direct eye contact, especially with an elder, is considered disrespectful. And so now we're trying to overlay this expectation of culturally responsiveness on a public education system that was not designed for that. Secondly, we expect the public education system to deliver a high quality education to all students versus the basic education it was designed to deliver. And we wanted to prepare all students for advanced outcomes, something the private schools was designed to do. And so as technology has changed the world, the bar for basic knowledge has moved up for us, right? And students today need a stronger basic education. Like even if we stay with that principle, now I know we don't want to stay with basic, but even if we stay with that principle of basic education, students need a stronger basic education to thrive in the 21st century and beyond, right? So what needs to change? Education reform is not enough. It is us merely tinkering around the edges of a system to get small changes. And I mean, any of you who have worked in any company with any type of technology system that never delivered exactly what you wanted to deliver, right? And so your company will go in and try to upgrade the system here and add in this module there. right? And then at some point, you guys decide, like, this is not working. This system cannot do what we need it to do. And your company will scrap that technology system, right? And you will then bring in a new system to do what you need it to do. That's what we're doing with education. We keep trying to add modules and tinkering with it for something that's not working, when really what we need to do is just to rebuild the whole system. And so while we are seeing some success with these small changes that both panelists have mentioned, they take a lot of work to achieve, right? And we have not been able to scale those improvements across our entire education system. These small changes will never produce the impact we want to see, especially in our low-income communities and communities of color, because the education system was not designed to yield those outcomes, and especially for those populations. It was not designed to prepare students to think critically and engage in the 21st century workforce. And so our entire education system must be rebuilt, and this rebuilding must begin with us setting a new primary purpose of public education beyond producing good people and providing basic knowledge. We must first ask ourselves, what must we do to prepare our students to be well equipped to compete both locally and globally? And then rebuild an education system that answers that question and is flexible and adaptive so that it can respond to the rapid rate of change brought on by technology and to the changing needs of our world. Thank you.
Rashida, wow, that was so tight. I'm so happy that you were able to hop on, because having that operational lens and that mindset, I think we all know that the school system is doing exactly what it was designed to do, but to go back and to like really break it down and then to create a solution, right? Here's an action-oriented solution that we can then take forward was awesome. So thank you so much, Rashida. Alrighty, and Dr. Keisha Wint.
Unmute myself. So thank you so much, Kumar, again for creating this space. And thank you, ladies. I've learned so much in just my little short time here. So thank you as well. Wealth of knowledge and expertise. And it's timely that I guess I'm going at the end, because Rashida kind of talked about the foundation in the beginning and understanding the history of a system that's in place, but also I think understanding, as we're here talking today about Black lives and Black women, and trying to create nurturing and supportive spaces, particularly as it relates to education for our children and for ourselves. So thinking about preschool, which has been my wheelhouse for the last 15 years or so. Just a short little background. I currently work as an interventionist in a urban public school. I have a PhD in family science and human development. I'm a social worker by trade, and I also do therapy with children and families, specifically focused on young children in school. But starting back to, and I'll talk a little bit more about the single story and hearing and understanding where children are coming from and being able to listen as I wrap up. But I wanted to start with preschool. And we learned a little bit about this conversation where children are being pushed out of school and not having access to education. But thinking about for preschool, it's even earlier that we see this trend happening of the preschool to prison pipeline, where children are being funneled at younger and younger ages. And we should all be outraged at any rate when we hear about preschoolers being suspended and expelled. But just to draw your attention a little bit to this graph, and mostly focusing on the yellow areas, which highlight the areas that we've been talking about for over the past 40 minutes around what's happening with Black children in particular. So they make up 18% of the preschool population. And this is not my graph, by the way. This is from the U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights. And these are based on 2014 stats that show that although preschool children make up 18% of the population, they are almost 4 times more likely to be suspended or expelled from preschool. So we see and start to wonder, like, even and just to be clear, we're talking about 3, 4, and 5-year-old children. who are beginning their educational journey, who are for the first time coming into this system, this environment that's supposed to be hopefully for learning, but as we're learning and we're seeing, sometimes they're being pushed out of these spaces. And so it behooves us to really pause and ask and question, why is this happening at such a disproportionate rate for young Black children, 3, 4, and 5-year-old babies, some people characterize, but very young children happening. And there could be a number of reasons for why we could speculate that might be happening, but we know that certainly there's some bias that's happening for our young children. And so I don't want to get into all of the reasons why, because we could be here all day having this conversation, but I just want us to see the early stages at which that push out starts to happen for our children. And it's important for us to really critically think about and ask what's happening at the very early stages of education for our children. And as we move on to the next slide, Kamara, again, in the interest of time, I think oftentimes when we think about trying to find a school and trying to develop those early stages and that connection, we sometimes, I think Dr. Fraser hinted about it a little bit, we sometimes have a shift in values and often might think that because it's closer to white, it's better. Because it's closer to white, it's a higher quality. And I would encourage you to be critical as parents, as advocates for young children, to think about what kind of space am I putting my 3, 4, 5-year-old Black or brown child into as they leave my home environment and launch into this new environment. And some questions that I just thought were key to be able to ask is, does the staff reflect the diversity in the student population? So we're learning more and more that over 50% of the student population consists of Black and brown children. So where your child is going to be educated, does the staff reflect that? Or is the staff what the national statistic is, where there's over 80% of the educational force are mainly white educators. So is that what you're looking for your child, or do you want something different? Again, values are different, but to be able to ask those questions and to think about the books and the curricula. We talked a lot about having it being culturally aligned. Does that reflect the community that's being served? Or is the literature that I'm reading, is the pictures that are on the walls, are my children able to see reflections of them? Is there an idea of a mirror book where I can look and see someone that looks like me? Or am I looking at a window book where I'm looking into the life of someone else who I've never really seen or had any interactions with, only my teachers and the people I see on TV? And then also, are families encouraged to share and participate with information about their family culture, their experiences, their ways of doing things? And also thinking about this, is there room for play for our children? Developmentally appropriate for children, 3, 4, and 5-year-old, that's their way of learning. So is it all about sitting and looking at ditto sheets or whatever other kind of learning sometimes happens there, or is there room for developmentally appropriate play? So I just wanted to encourage families, as you move through and try to be critically aware of where you're sending off your children to, is in an environment that sometimes is often vastly different from your home environment, to be able to ask some of these questions and to be able to critically kind of take the veil off of what we thought or what we've always been, I would say, conditioned to think about spaces that educational spaces, that that quality is about being closer to something that's other than us, and that's not true. So I would just say some pointers, really being able to educate and communicate. And when we talk about education, being able to educate yourself on what's the curriculum, what's the staff like, what's this teacher's ideology about race and about Black people and about people that are different from him or herself. And you would ask that of both. So being able to ask questions and to educate yourself on what's happening there, but also to have them be educated about you and who you are as your family values. I'd also encourage parents to listen to their children. Children might not always have the words to be able to say that I don't like the way I feel around that teacher, or I don't like going to that school because nobody there looks like me. But they might say it in their actions. So being able to really listen and take time to ask questions and talk to your children and volunteer. And also, I think this idea of protecting and preserving. In my line of work, we're talking about preschoolers, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. And I think oftentimes there is this push to adultify, particularly Black and brown children. And there's research on this that talks about, they're viewed as older and less innocent than their white and same age peers. So being able to protect their childhoods, to protect their innocence, to protect this nurture dependent stage of development for our young children, and recognizing that beauty and that quality and high standards are not about other. They are about who we are and who we've always been. And I love that, there's this collective idea all across all the speakers that have spoken today about recognizing our worth, recognizing our brilliance, recognizing our beauty that comes from who we are, and not giving it away or saying that we're not bright or we're not brilliant or we're not beautiful, because we are. I think what often has happened is we've been using the wrong measuring stick. We've been using some other tool to measure that. And every time you come up against using a wrong tool to measure, you would try to measure water with a yardstick, you're going to come up short. So in my final call to action steps, I would I call them the 3 Ps. I've been thinking about this a lot over the last couple of weeks and months. As a Black woman, I would say, have been going through my own turmoil and trauma around like how to navigate all that's happening, and particularly as someone who supports children and families. So the first P is personally, like what am I doing personally as an individual to reflect my own worth and beauty and knowledge for those around me. And also that's around building relationships. And also, as Dr. Fraser talked about, trying to create those safe spaces like this, where we can be nurtured and supported by other like-minded individuals. I think the other P is also professionally. What am I doing as a professional to share my knowledge, to share my understanding of what's happening, and also bringing someone alongside. In a lot of these spaces, we have opportunities to mentor, opportunities to just even share your experience with someone else. So professionally, if there's a room for a new intern or someone else to come along, who are we trying to get to come into that space with us? So I think having an eye out for what I'm doing professionally in my work, but also how I can do that relationally. And then I think the last piece that we've talked about or touched around, but politically, it's real, so I just think that we as a people really need to exercise our political power, and from everything from the school board all the way to the presidential election, like, and everything in between, and not just be brainwashed or fooled into thinking that like this is not a fight, and it's because we did that, right? We did that before. So I would just, whatever your views are, to really make sure that you exercise your political power. So those are my 3 Ps: a call for action, personally, professionally, and politically, to really help to move about, push the envelope, and bring about actionable change for our children and for us as a people. I had 2 books that I wanted to highlight here. I think when initially we were talking about just resources for parents. So Don't Look Away is Embracing Anti-Bias Classrooms in the Early Childhood Spaces. And the author is a phenomenal researcher, and I've had the opportunity to speak with her and read a lot of her work. So I think it's a good starting place for all of us. And then this other book is The Brilliance of Black Boys Cultivating School Success in Early Grades. Just a wonderful resource and tools for parents, families, and educators to support others. So that was my 5 minutes. I think I went over, but I wanted to thank again for the opportunity and just give it back to Kamara.
Keisha, thank you so much. What a wealth of knowledge. I love the fact that you talked a lot about the adultification. So another call to action is, those of you guys in the audience, go ahead and research. As Dr. Wint said, there is so much information about what it means when we adultify Black bodies. And how we are taking away the innocence of our children from such a young age. And I think it's so important that we have some framework, and I really understand what that is. Your second slide, where you ask those really important questions of the type of school environment, the type of learning environment you're going to put your young children into. And I think actually those questions can run the gamut. K-12, you should really be asking about the environment that your students and that your children will be a part of. So thank you for all of those steps. I think I'm going to actually share this PowerPoint with those folks who are registered, so you guys can see it, look at it at your leisure, as long as the panelists are okay with that. I'm going to stop sharing the screen so that we can just have an interactive talk session right now. Awesome. And I would, so these questions have come a little bit from some of the people who had registered within the last few weeks. And one of the questions that I thought that we could highlight is, someone is curious as to what injustices, inequities that you guys have experienced, and what were your strategies to overcome and forge towards success despite those inequities and injustices? I'm not going to call on anyone. Whoever feels like hopping in, please feel free.
Sorry, Kamar, can you restate the question?
Yeah, absolutely. So what injustices and inequities have you all experienced? And what have you done, or what strategies do you use to overcome and forge towards success despite those inequities and injustices?
I can kick us off. I think about 3 or 4 pivotal moments. The first is being in New York City public schools as a kid, in 1st or 2nd grade, and actually in both grades, having teachers openly question whether or not the work I produced was my own because it was high quality.
Wow.
Whether or not I had done my homework independently because it was right. So imagine being, 6 and 7 years old and already understanding that people have lower expectations for you because you're a Black woman. So that stands out. Fast forward to high school, college admissions and acceptances, and having close white friends say to me, "Oh, you're not gonna have any problem getting into college because you're smart and you're Black," and also seemingly jealous of perceived opportunities or advantages I would have in that process, and then just internalizing that as I went on to pursue higher education for free. I did get a free tuition scholarship that I deserved, but that stays with you. And then following the playbook, right? I went to top schools. I went to an Ivy League law school. I started a high-performing school that, people discounted my leadership at the very beginning. Like, is this really going to be successful? Which is common. But then the school went on every year to be in the top 5% of schools in the state, to, best performance from our neighbors in Williamson County in Nashville that is predominantly white and affluent. And in each of those situations, I had peers, I had people that reported to me, I had people that I reported to, our board of directors in some instances, that openly challenged the work that I was doing in ways that ultimately were unhelpful in advancing education equity. Others on the panel spoke to the fact that, you know, when we achieve, it's not a miracle. It's what we're capable of. The response I often got to the Black excellence and the excellence of my students I served was surprise, and a treatment like I wasn't even responsible for it too. That's the other thing. Like, it was like, oh, how did this happen? Like, oh, you know, we had nothing to do with it. And it's like, no, that was by design. I built this school to advance outcomes for Black and brown children, and we did that. Because you can redesign systems to actually eradicate injustice. And so I just encourage everyone to dive into their inner entrepreneur, their inner intrapreneur, their inner creator, because that journey was actually a really spiritual one for me. When you actually go from conceiving of something to creating it, to then seeing it thrive and be successful, it just changes how you walk through life, because you really realize that you do have the capacity within to make change and have it be a powerful change. And so I just encourage everyone to look inward. And then also, I couldn't have done it without the support of people on this call. Like, Kamara was with me in those early days of school leadership. She was with me when I cried the tears. She was with me when I celebrated the joys. We would stay up talking till 1, 2 in the morning about how we were going to redesign systems all around the country. And so just know that you're not alone. Reach out to us. You know, all of us, I think, will make ourselves available to people on the call that want to start that journey. I just hope and pray that people find that strength within to launch a new vision and to do so.
Yeah, and thank you, Mia. I just wanted to piggyback off of some of what she shared. It's just this idea of, I think, always having to prove your worth or validate your existence in a particular space. And it, you know, it's in the little subtle ways of like, oh, you're in this lounge, can I see your ID? Or, oh, you're here, or you're our teacher, oh, can I see your credentials? Or just not the expectation of, you know, this is where we ought to be. Having to prove your existence in a particular space. I think that is a constant microaggression, chip, trauma daily that we all. But I think sometimes also to be critical of us, we sometimes do it to each other, right? So I think wanting to be able to create a space in a community where we always expect excellence from each other and every person that I meet, because I've been we're all kind of part of that brainwashing of like, oh, it's this in order to be good. It's other in order to be excellent. That, yeah, we expect like everybody on this panel, and then some is like beyond, right? So being able to know and recognize our worth and our brilliance and own that and own it for each other. So I think it's like, it's an undoing of this, I just call it trauma. I keep saying that, but in this brainwashing that needs to be undone and a relearning for all of us. I think it's a journey, and I would not dare to say that I've arrived or I'm there yet, but I think it's a constant everyday struggle in big and small ways. Even going to the supermarket, it's like you're wearing that because we're conditioned that if you go looking like you have to present a certain way in a particular environment to be accepted or validated that you belong there, which is, I find, ongoingly challenging and troublesome, but we move through. So, yeah.
And if I could just quickly, Kamara, just add an exclamation mark to what Dr. Went shared. You know, when you asked about the inequity, some of the things that popped into my mind were the things that we perpetrate on one another. And so my mind quickly went to, I was in my second year of my MBA program at Purdue, go Boilermakers. And we were getting ready for the National Black MBA Conference. And then I had an interview with the company I ended up taking a job with, Raytheon. And I had just got my hair braided, fresh braids. And then they called me for the interview. And so some of my colleagues were like, my Black colleagues were "Oh, Rashida, are you going to take your braids out?" And I said, "No." And this was, mind you, in 2005. So we hadn't evolved to where we are now when it comes to the acceptability of braids and locks in the workplace. And I said, no. I said, if it's the right company for me, they will take me exactly as I am. And I went into that interview knowing that just something as simple as my hairstyle could potentially cost me a job, but it didn't. And Raytheon hired me. So, but we have to be able to stand in that as well.
I love that you brought that up, Rashida, because I think there's so many, we have so many thought processes around, do we assimilate, or are we going to come to the table as our authentic selves? And what does that look like? And do we feel comfortable enough to do it? And there's so many implications for doing each step, right? And so I always think about, I think, Keisha, when you were saying just daily, there's so many microaggressions. Well, daily, there's thought processes that we have to go through that so many other people don't, right? What do I wear? What hairstyle am I going to bring? How am I going to speak? Am I going to tone it down? Or am I going to just keep it real, And like, we have to constantly ask ourselves these questions as we walk through these spaces. And then I love, Mia, the fact that you said, like, I remember the times that and I miss those times, girl, we got to do them again. We're staying up to 1, 2 o'clock in the morning and chit-chatting about how we're going to not just save the world, but be there for each other. And I think that that's one of the things that allows us to walk through this space daily and have the courage to, is because we find our sisters, we find our community, we find the places that we can go to where we can vent, where we can feel safe, and who also give us the courage to continue on in this work. So that leads me to transition to something that I think is important during this time. How are we taking care of ourselves? So what are some self-care strategies you would like to share with our audience today?
I'm a big fan of going to the spa, something I do with my mom often. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to see her in several months, but my mom taught me the importance of self-care. And so those little sort of luxury moments of, just taking care of yourself, mind, body, spirit, in those spaces that are often designed, to really calm your mind and allow you to just restore and rejuvenate are really powerful. In this moment of social distancing, obviously going to the spa is unwise. So I've had to create a mini spa at home. I actually got that tip from Kamara of just, creating a mood, and having a bath at night and things like that. And so those have been ways that I've been trying to just heal and stay positive and rejuvenate.
And along those lines, I just, I'm now becoming a bigger fan of being still. I think I would say also, particularly for Black women, we somehow have this, and I'll speak for myself then, this idea of being on the wheel. Like, the more we do, the better, the more productive we are. And I'm not really sure where that came from. I'm sure there's some literature on it, but just this idea that I need to constantly be going, doing, moving, and saving the world, or else I'm no good. And I think what this pandemic has certainly, taught me is just the benefit. And I've always known, but just reclaiming it, the idea of being still, enjoying my own company, and just taking time out to pause and to be still, and really being okay with that. And, I was just like, oh, this backyard is all right. Like, to be able to sit and watch the squirrels. So I think just this idea of being still has been something that I'm glad to have reclaimed and found a lot of peace and solace in that. So I think as far as self-care, I've been being intentional about being still.
That was good. So I think one thing for me is like what she said about the sun, just sitting outside and just being in the space, enjoying the outside, enjoying what we see. I always say, and I've been doing this for years, is watch things that are funny. look at movies and things that'll make you laugh. Do things that cost no intellectual thought. Watch a game show. If you do those things, that'll help keep you sane. And so when I'm kind of feeling a little down, I'll turn the TV on. Like, I'm going to watch Family Feud for like 3 hours and just laugh at Steve Harvey. And, if you do things like that, that helps your immune system. People don't always tell you that, but that laughter helps the immune system. It helps build you back up and get you to where you want to be. So I just say, do things that are going to make you feel good about you. I'm not like Mia said about the spa. I don't like people touching me. So that's one of my things. And so it was like, people buy me spa cards all the time and they don't know that about me. But that's not something I like to do, but I love to laugh. And
Give them to me.
I was just about to say the same thing.
So, so do something that is going to make you feel good. And it may not be something everybody else likes, but find out what makes you happy. One of the other things that was very therapeutic for me is writing. Of course, I wrote my first book. And so it was so therapeutic to just write all of that stuff down, write the things that I know, write what I've learned, tell the stories. And so that's what I would suggest to kind of keep saying.
Yeah, and
Katrina, that is, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, Katrina, that is so you, because whenever I need a laugh, I just call Katrina up because she has me rolling on the phone laughing so much. So that I know that you love laughter. It's so great. Mm-hmm. And it's infectious. So thank you so much. Yeah. Rashida?
Yeah, but I see some people starting to throw a few things in the chat too around pausing. I meditate. That's something I do. I want to advocate for therapy. Lord knows I have been reached. Look, I told my therapist, I said, we got to go from once a month to every 2 weeks between the Rona and George Floyd and everything else, because we as Black people, we live with this double consciousness all the time of what it means to be Black. But most of us compartmentalize that, right? Because we cannot function on a daily basis if we are consistently thinking about what it means for us to be Black in America. But it's been in our face constantly in social media, on TV. And so we've been unable, I won't speak for everyone else, I've been unable to compartmentalize that. I can't put that back. So therapy, and I want to advocate for that within our community. And then the other thing I'll say is just something funny for me, which is getting dressed. Like, Lord knows, I have worn out the yoga pants and the tank tops. And so Sunday I said, I'm going to get dressed like I'm really going somewhere. So I put on like a little summer dress and did my makeup and sat right here on the couch and watched TV. Watch church online on the YouTube. But it was just like, I have to get dressed. So, sometimes we just have to kind of break out of those, routines that we've been doing.
Yes, I love that. Actually, I try to get dressed every day. I even put on shoes, my heels and my boots on and all of it, because it does make me feel better than when I'm just lounging around in the house. I'm glad that you I see a question in that chat that I actually want to ask you all. How do we deal with Karens in the education space?
Don't. That's my response. They're there. When they were talking about ways that you've been discriminated against, I love to laugh and I love to have a good time. But one of the things I've been accused of being aggressive, the things that people have said about me would shock you. Because it shocked me. I'm like, what? When did I do that? But they're there. And the way that you deal with them, I deal with people on data. I think it was Bloomberg had a shirt that said, in God we trust, everybody else bring data. So that's my motto. Everybody else, I get it and I hear it. If you don't have any data to back up what you're saying, then you may as well not even come talk to me, because everything can be subjective. So you deal with your Karens based off of data. Look at the data. I used to push all the time. How do you know? I hear what you're saying about kids' behavior, and we've tracked that and we got that. But how do you know your kids instructionally? What do you know about what they know mentally and in that changes the conversation. And that's how you deal with them. You deal with them based off of that data. What are they bringing to you that you can actually prove?
I have 2 follow-up points. One is I echo everything Dr. Fraser just said about don't. I nearly lost my life, literally, meaning like the emotional stress, the weight of it, fighting every single Karen, or, you know, and Karens come in all shapes and sizes and colors.
Yes. Yes.
So over the last year, I've really just been practicing not engaging and not giving my energy to that all the time. And that's been really powerful. But what I am doing is surrounding myself with allies who are serious about creating anti-bias, anti-racist spaces, which actually means decentering white norms. Like, to be a devil's advocate here, to not always worship data, which is a white dominant norm. Like, they respond really well to data, right? But what about our stories? Our stories are just as valid. And when someone's telling you that they're being discounted or not heard or unseen, or, you know, just not taking their story at face value, that also causes pain and causes harm. And so I've just been luckily in St. Louis, the conversation's a little bit more advanced here, just because of everything that happened in the wake of Michael Brown being killed, you know, tragically 6 years ago now. So, you know, here there are a number of schools and school systems that are actively, even white-led schools that are demonstrably changing how they do business, and that's been exciting. But in terms of the Karen, I just totally echo not giving the energy, because ultimately it's not worth it. Like, yeah, it was not worth it.
Mia, I want to add to that, and that's a black hole. If you are spending your time trying to deal with the Karens, it's a black hole. You can't win. There's nothing that you're going to be able to say, do to help change the mentality or the focus. What you do is you let them do what they do, and you continue to look at. I push me on that. Bring the data. What does the data say? We can talk about the data, talk about where the kids are from that standpoint, or even in the work environment. If it's a black hole. I repeated the hole 3 times, and now I'm at the point where, okay, yeah, I hear all of that, but all of my colorism and who I am as a black woman is going to be who I am. And if you're interested in me being part of your team, you're going to have to accept that. Just like I accept diversity from everybody else, you're going to have to accept that. If not, you're going to get in a cycle of constantly dealing with Karens, because it's never ending. It's never ending. So stop.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes left. Before the panelists leave, actually a couple of things. If in the chat you guys can pop in your social media, if anyone wants to connect with you via Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever you feel most comfortable with. If people want to get in contact with you, please put in your contact information. But in these last 5 minutes, do you guys have anything that you would like to say to our audience members?
Yeah, I just want to throw in, sorry, I was so caught up in the system, I forgot to share my call to action. I was on the roll. Anyone who knows me knows that I geek out about that type of stuff. So I had to pare myself back last night. I had a whole dissertation on the system. That's my life. But I want to say 2 quick calls to actions. One for parents. Please review the school code of conduct and practices wherever you send your children or your child, and advocate to end bias policies and practices that diminish your culture. It's something I see a lot. One of the things I do as I go into organizations and I do organizational design reviews, and I look at, everything from top to bottom in terms of what they need to grow their organization. And one of the things I perpetually see, especially in charter schools that are marketing themselves to low income families and families of color, are these codes of conduct that basically tell students not to do a lot of things that are associated with their culture, like you know, you can't wear large earrings. Well, who normally wears large earrings? You know what I mean? Like, and you see a lot of these, and we don't think about that. And I know Dr. Went spoke about that as well. So start to look at that and advocate for your children, right? And advocate that those policies are changed and get other parents on board with that, because those things do lead to our kids being suspended and, you know, and receiving disciplinary action for doing things that are a part of their culture. I had a teacher want to write me up. Well, she did. She sent me to the office because I had to go to the bathroom, but it wasn't on the scheduled bathroom break time. And after a while, she wouldn't let me go. And I got a black mama. She said, well, look, don't you ever come home having had an accident on yourself. So if you have to go, you just go and I'll deal with the principal later. And that was basically what happened. It was like, no, I have to go and I am going to go to the bathroom and we will just deal with the principal later. And my mama will be more than happy to talk to y'all about it. So like, let's make sure that we're looking at those policies and we're advocating for our children. But since this is a conversation about Black women, can I say this? Women, please seek leadership roles. Know the path of advancement and follow that, because you can have a greater impact touching more students, families, and the policies and structures that affect our children. I was really surprised when I joined K-12 or education that a lot of teachers didn't actually know the hierarchy. Like I worked for the state Department of Education in Tennessee, and they would say things like, well, you guys told us to do that. And I was like, no, that's a district policy. That's not a state policy, right? And so because they don't understand the system, most teachers don't, then you don't understand how to affect change in that system, and you don't understand how to work in that system. And so 76% of teachers are women, according to the National Center for Education. 24% are male and 80% are white. We've shared that. Overall, now think about it, 76% of teachers are women, but 54.2% of principals are women. And then when we get to superintendents, now we're talking about 24%. Those numbers don't make sense. Why do we have women at decreasing percentages as we go up the ladder when women make up the majority of the teaching force, irrespective of whether you're talking about white, Black, or any other ethnicity? So I just want to encourage women, please. I know some of you think being in the classroom is the best thing that you can do for our kids, but actually putting yourself in a position where you can impact change at a larger scale is the best thing you can do for our kids.
And just to add, I think we may have one more minute. I just wanted to ask parents and educators, families, to ask who it is that you are raising your child or the children that are in front of you to be. I think oftentimes we get caught up in this moment, this time, this situation, and we don't think about, who do I want Keisha to be? Who do I want Rashida to be at the end of the story? So when you have that vision in mind of who you're raising, if a child asks you a question, you could say, well, I'm raising this young man, or I'm raising this little boy to be someone who is critical in his thought, or who pushes back, or who inquires, or who loves to learn. So I'm going to answer this. So just thinking about who it is that you're raising your child or your children to be. And sometimes those moments, that place, that system, you might have to choose differently because of who you're trying to raise your child or children to be. So I just would think to ask that question.
Excellent. Mia, any last words? I know we're at 12:31, but so we can wrap up in the next 60 seconds.
Yeah, just to build on Dr. Wyn's point, I mean, I think about how I developed my voice as a leader, and actually it started as a kid. My parents raised me to nourish my voice, and it often meant that I was a little bit of a terror as a kid. But I would just encourage parents, educators, both on the line, to really think about the systems that you have in your home and in your schools that unintentionally silence Black and brown voices. Yes. And how can you actually give them the space to be who they are and to disagree with you, right? Like, I mean, long before law school, I was prone to win an argument with my parents because they gave me all the space to flex my mouth and to share what it was like to be me as a kid. So I just encourage all of you to not be afraid of that and to honor it, because I mean, those are the people that go on to then be sure of themselves as young people and as adults, and to challenge systems and the status quo.
Excellent. Katrina, last words. Dr. Fraser.
Last words, love your children. Pay more attention to them than you do anybody else.
Awesome. Well, on that note, thank you guys so much. Thank you to the audience for participating. We love seeing all the energy in the chat. Look out for some follow-up emails. Please look up all the panelists if you would like to engage with them further. And thank you. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Kumar. Bye-bye.